The 9-day excursion had seemed to fly by for Lorne. Though nothing like a vacation, it was far less laborious than reporting on different commune news throughout their metro. Lorne had felt grateful for his transfer, but the separation from his last remaining family put him in a state of limbo that prevented him from ever feeling accomplished. On one side, his sister and remaining brother's absence motivated him. However, it felt the more upward mobility he found in his career, the further he got from his family. Junip lived in a pre-specialization school in an E-level commune. Though crime and other threats of the urban jungle were rampant, she had been fortunate enough to be in the same metropolitan area as her slightly older brother Cedric. Cedric's calm and caring demeanor managed to acquire him a service industry placement. Though the hours were grueling and the tasks were often demeaning, it was better than the manual labor career. Cedric lived in a small single-room occupancy that he rented from the place he was assigned that was fortunately only a few kilometers away from Junip's boarding house. Despite often being further than the moon she watched peering through the polluted atmosphere, Lorne's inquisitive nature seemed to rub off on Junip in ways that seemed out of all three of their control. With no parents and 2 deceased siblings, Lorne was now the oldest of the 3, and he was using his newfound opportunity as a passage for safety before his sister would be sent off as another indentured servant to the corporations. Lorne stood in the guest lobby room near the bridge, peering out the massive window. The tense nature of the officials pacing around the bridge deterred most employees from the area. While it put Lorne at risk for momentary interrogations by the shuttle security, he found it was worth it for the privacy he got. Most of the shuttle security were not as rigid as the company security that's overwhelming presence seemed to overpower and overwrite the initial security team's protocol. It had become apparent that the jurisdiction had shifted, and Mulsco was now orchestrating every aspect of security. As the shuttle spent its remaining hours tailing the Aureus K asteroid to match its gravitational force so the engineers could engage the landing site safely, Lorne could feel the subtle spiral motion. Yellow lights would flash on the doors, indicating brief moments of gravity module discrepancies. The sudden shakes and jerking motions of the ship remind Lorne of the tug and pull of the outdated private-owned transit systems that littered every metropolitan across Earth. When he closed his eyes, he almost felt he was there. The mumbling of non-existent passengers merged with the humming of the shuttle. The bumps and the beeps of the yellow flashing light of the shuttle lobby infused with the memory of the flickering artificial golden light of the transit system, so deeply ingrained into Lorne's memories. The gasket doors squealed. Lorne unclasped his hands around his back in surprise. He was allowed to be there, yet he panicked. He is here, a security affirmed. Lorne turned around to see 2 guards gesturing someone else over. Lorne had completely turned around with the spiraling shuttle showing the vast dark side of Mars through the massive window behind them. "Lorne, did someone call you up?" one of the guards asked. "No, I actually just enjoy this view for my leisure time. I hope it is not an issue." Lorne felt uneasy by these guards knowing his name. Was he a matter discussion? "No, you just made my job a lot easier," the guard said, smiling and gesturing for Lorne to stay put. Emerging from the right side of the bridge entrance was none other than a man named Mitz himself. He seemed less agile than before, as he wobbled over in a slick navy blue sleeping garment that resembled an athletic leotard. His scrawny body matched with his small pouch of a belly made him look like a frog to Lorne. "Hello," the man said with graceful steps that seemed larger than a man of his stature could accomplish. "I am your employment resource of Mulsco, Mitzfield." Mitz took a moment to examine Lorne. Employment resource workers were the ultra-capitalist grandchildren of the career path once known as human resource. Only as companies evolved to value sustainment and results over employee well-being, the role became more occupied with using tightly crafted bureaucratic systems to stifle any form of internal uprising. They were often referred to as guard chihuahuas due to their constant yapping and precautions nature. The aspect of these roles that made it more dynamic than average supervision roles was their deceiving approach to ensuring policy was carried out. A supervisor simply caught you slacking on your job. An employee resource ensures you are not speaking ill about your corporation to the public. It made total sense to Lorne that this was the man's role, considering he seemed to occupy himself with making sure people were following policy while also trying to be buddies with everyone. Typically, you and I would have little reason to interact, but at this point in our travel, all passengers become liabilities, and the baton of responsibility is passed on to our authority. Mitz paused and looked down at his small legs beneath his protruding gut. You seem to have made quite a fan amongst the administration, Lorne Owl. Please call me Lorne. I am enthusiastic to display my worth once again, Lorne said. Back. The man reached for Lorne's hand and shook with intention. I am sure you are. His smile simmered to a small line that meant nothing but business. And I'm sure you will be just as pleased to have the one-on-one chit-chat that Mr. Bruck requested. Aye. But, before I have you escorted to his quarters, I must inform you of the conditions of this circumstance. Conditions? Lorne said. Yes, Mitz responded quickly. The circumstance? Lorne raised his eyebrows. Journalist? Mitz said, shrugging with a grin at the two guards behind him. I was going to include you into the same brief we do for all the employees, though it seems circumstances are allowing us to improvise an even briefer briefing. A more genuine smile appeared, but it was from the satisfaction he got from his choice of wording. We have been briefed continuously on landing and safety, Lorne reminded Mitz. Believe me, if this were about buckling in when the orange light flashes, I would have delegated this task to someone else. Okay, I am all ears. Perfect. There are various reasons that we as a company may choose to keep certain aspects of our operation confidential, Mitz began, and his avoidance of eye contact with Lorne made Lorne wonder if his dodgy eyes were really a method of reciting policies. Like? Patented technology, stock insights, tested technology. Must I continue? He listed them fast, and it was plain that he did not want to continue. Well, then we will move on. Due to the nature of this circumstance, we have rigorous protocols and guidelines to ensure only selected information is available. The words left Mitz's mouth, and Lorne kept his face expressionless. Something he knew Mitz was not cut out to attempt to read. While it was already redundantly clear what Lorne's purpose was, it felt as if though Mitz was the only one blowing the cover by making it so obvious. Respectfully, sir, literature is my thing. Not just because I like to write, but also for my ability to read. In journalism, you learn that language is everywhere and in everything. I have read into my surroundings enough that I can assure you I know my purpose. The gasket squealed open from the entrance hall on the adjacent side of the lobby. 3 Molesco employees walked by, one being Marston. He glanced back, but the door quickly shut before Lorne could see his disappointed eyes. Upon doing any interviewing or collecting of data from any individual affiliated to our or any affiliated association, you must provide them responder with an on-off-the-record precursor. What? Lorne said in disbelief. No, that would be off the record what? Mitz said with a menacing grin. Off the record. You are saying that every time I ask someone something I must start with letting them know that the question is off or on the record. Precisely. On the record. Are you aware I cannot work like this? Lorne, please. Do not make this harder than it needs to be. This is ridiculous. Off the record. What more do you all want? I am going to romanticize the field and show the glory of this business. Why are you guys choking down on me in a way that is going to make any meaningful interaction impossible? Lorne knew he was playing on thin ice, though he also knew his reward for this assignment would only be achieved if he had the artistic liberties he had when he could immerse himself. Mitz was turning red, but his mouth snapped into a rehearsed smile that seemed to fill in every crack and crevice of his face like the missing link to his. You must understand, Mitz said calmly, and with patience. Lorne's eyes flicked over to the 2 guards that were either not listening or taught to appear as if so. Mitz repeated softer. You must understand. You no longer have a choice. Off the record. Is there anything else? Lorne said, gulping with an intimidation he never thought he would receive from such a small, groomed, red-faced man in a tight-fitting one-piece. Nothing that you have not already heard. A moment of silence passed, and Mitz continued. As you know, no amount of position or rank will make you immune to the mandatory gravitational blood and muscle compensation exercises. Mr. Bruck is currently doing his cardio mandates in his quarters while enjoying IM cinema. He requested you join him for quick talk. The guards walked on each side of Lorne with Mitz following behind. There were several doors in the hall, all of which were a mystery to Lorne. Finally, one of the guards stopped and placed his face to one of the sensors which abruptly slid the door open. In the room was a silhouette of a large man sitting on a large contraption that had alternating limbs on both sides rotating vigorously. The guard stood by the door, and Mitz and Lorne approached the sweat-covered man in the bionic workout machine. When Lorne approached the hunk of metal wrapped around the man, he saw that it was a state-of-the-art workout device meant to exercise the human outfall. Then, it applied pressures and tension and various weight calibrations while temporarily sending pulses to the muscles, making them numb. Thus, the device removed the entire mental battle of working out through an unconscious effort being solely operated by AI machine. As Lorne got closer, he saw a device around Mr. Bruck's moist and red face. They wrapped around his head and had circular suction points attached on the right and left side of his forehead. His eyes were almost closed with the white of his eyes showing. He seemed to rock his head with enjoyment from each side. From his perspective, he was a captain of a fictional Napoleonic-era ship. The ship was fuming smoke as pirate ships surrounded blasting away their cannons. The brave captain, who would alternate its appearance to look like the viewer, raised his sword as his crew fired back, creating a massive black smoke cloud. The captain yells, "If thou shalt sink, then let us meet these wretched thieves below deck." Mr. Bruck yelled this, breaking the silence in the room. Lorne stood in amazement. Mitz looked at Lorne the same way Lorne had looked at Marston. Lorne's amusement in knowing Mr. Bruck could not see them back made Lorne feel empowered in a way Mitz could not stand. "Sir, I have arrived with Lorne as you requested." Mitz finally spoke up. Mr. Bruck's head nodded to the direction of Mitz with annoyance. Lorne seemed to not be alone in finding Mitz's voice to be a nuisance. "Who?" Mr. Bruck said, with his eyes still white. He had not paused his I am cinema. "Lorne, sir. He goes by Lorne." Mitz spoke. "Ah, Lorne," Mr. Bruck said, shifting his head to the other side. "Lorne, have you ever seen one of these before, off the record? The workout device or the I am cinema?" Lorne asked nervously. "Huh," Mr. Bruck said. "Off the record. The workout device or the I am cinema?" Lorne repeated, looking at Mitz, who seemed worried now. "What the fuck is this off the record bullshit you keep saying?" "I am talking about the workout device. Everyone has seen an I am cinema at some point, right?" Mr. Bruck seemed more confused than annoyed. Lorne glared at Mitz, who stood silent. "Well, sir, if you really want to know, I am little confused to what it is." Lorne began now with his eyes directly on Mitz. "Sir, it is a protocol that your administrative teams put into place to ensure that." Mitz blurted out but was interrupted. Lorne glared at Mitz. "I was a little confused to what it is, but I am assuming it is one of those new workout devices that allows the user to relax while the machine does everything for you." Lorne smiled at Mitz. "I have never seen it used in combination with the I am cinema. Very creative." "Oh, it is glorious, Lorne. If you could only see," Mr. Bruck said as he slashed at a pirate trying to swing aboard. The clashing of swords and cannons was muffled down so he could hear Lorne properly. His character trotted to the front of the boat as he slashed his way through two unworthy barber opponents. One of the crewmen falls forward to him with a sword in his neck. He yells for the captain's help. The captain assesses the wound but must make the choice to leave him as more pirates flood aboard the ship. The captain yells once again. "Is the ship the wood upon we sail or the crew within it?" Only this line Mr. Bruck did not impulsively yell. "Now explain the record thing," Mr. Bruck said with his head leaned all the way back, exposing his eyes even more. "It is a protocol your company made to ensure that everyone is aware of my intentions in asking any information." Lorne spoke, feeling the fear once more. "Mitz," Mr. Bruck said. "Leave the room." Mitz looked at Lorne with disbelief and quickly walked out. Lorne was now in the room with Mr. Bruck alone aside from the guards at the door. The humming of the shuttle and pumping of the workout machinery made Lorne feel surreal. It had felt as if though he was inside one giant machine, and Mr. Bruck was plugged into the center like some type of motherboard. Entertainment removing any form of mundanes from this chore of an experience. Blinded by some fantastic version of reality where he gets to imagine he is integrity-filled leader. Only the reality was a sweaty mortal wrapped in a machine that removes every aspect of struggle. With that, every aspect of achievement was corrupted by the confused will of men that were naive enough to think the brute force of the machine could fill the void. His principles of capitalism's ability to sustain an authentic hierarchy of competence were consistently invalidated by the gluttony of his methods. "Lorne, there will be no more of that off-the-record jargon." Mr. Bruck spoke. "I believe our operation will expose itself, and that exposure will reveal to the rest of the world how essential the work we do here is. If the team aboard Aureus K are anything like the team you have here, I am sure they will prove that. They are better," Mr. Bruck said with certainty. "Off the..." Lorne stopped, and Mr. Bruck shifted his large head. "Why did you think that?" "Old breed. Unlike what most people like to believe, the companies just make the work. It is the state committees that choose the placement scores." Mr. Bruck started, but then he grinned, rotating his head again. "Well, I think we both know the game enough to know if a business is truly playing ball this day and age, we are also ensuring we get some unofficial reps in those committees." Lorne nodded but said, "Sure," when he remembered Mr. Bruck was incapable of knowing this. "Well, we do not have the same types getting assigned to our line of work like we used to. Now it is either a bunch of kiss-ass career climbers, or antisocial assholes that no one else wants in Earth Industries." Mr. Bruck's ship was now sinking to the ocean as the captain laid floating on a piece of driftwood. The workout machine had slowed down tremendously and was now winding to a halt. "We used to get real loyal guys." Hard workers, the type who do not stop till the job is done. They do not need punitive measures, just a sense of duty. A lot of the guys we got are ex-buccaneers. Soldiers of the States Fleet assigned to yours truly. They have been on that rock for decades and have defended it fiercely in times of guerrilla warfare. Guerrilla warfare. Lorne's question seemed to revitalize. Mr. Bruck, who was now laying completely still as the machine had now ended its cycle. Oh, we had a Jonko try to take over twice in the last 8 years. They managed on boarding the station and causing a collapse in one of the internal wings of the drilling rig. Are they going to relinquish you of them, since Mulsco's security is practically a private army now? Well, that is a question I have been concerned with myself, Lorne. Mr. Bruck seemed to lose tension, finally revealing his pupils. We have scanned 8 new asteroids and gained jurisdiction of some various promising terrain. Lorne knew he was referring to moon real estate, but even he knew better than to ask which one and where at. So, if you guys decide to shift focus on other operations, what will happen to this place? Lorne asked. It will become a beacon of opportunity, Mr. Bruck said. Opportunities for competition. So, you'd be better off with this place being gone, or at least well guarded. But depending on how elections are going to pan out, another corporation might just inherit our hard work. Why would they think that is justified? Lorne asked, trying to please Mr. Bruck. Easy. They think we are in debt for the legal infrastructure and protection. So everyone owes someone something, I suppose. The dogs eat dogs. We are not dogs. We are the hand of civilization trying to feed the worthy. Yet unchecked thoughts are what birth rogue traitors burrowing in every business. Those are the parasites that make the dogs forget who fed them. Lorne thought he understood, though it seemed as though he was talking more about internal betrayal instead of the Junko proxy wars. What is the state looking for? I mean, in order for Mulsco to remain in charge of this rock. They need proof we are producing and bringing back revenue, or that all other competitors are unfit to manage the area better. Where do I come in? I need you to show that we have things on lock here. Rebellions or mutiny are non-existent. The devastation of Junkos, and the importance of us getting a consistent supply of troops. They must know that an operation like this can only exist with the support of trained men sent to us. Feels like 2 different narratives at once. You are good at that, absolutely. Lorne felt exposed. Did Mr. Bruck actually see a layer in Lorne's writing that was meant to be deciphered only by fellow laborers? Mr. Bruck sat up slowly from his contraption as 2 white-garmented medical examiners glided into the room. They each stood in a position to help pry Slick Wet Man's exhausted body out of the chair. Lorne stepped back. Will that be all, Mr. Bruck? Lorne asked as the examiners placed his oily body onto a wheelchair that had fans attached to each end blowing cool air all over his wet body. He is unconscious now, one of the examiners said without looking at Lorne. Lorne stepped out the room looking back one last time. A silhouette of a machine besides 2 slim figures strapping in a much larger man into a seat. Lorne made it back to his room, making sure to look out every window port available on his way. As Lorne approached his own room, he noticed something odd. The door was open. When Lorne stepped into the room, his eyes met Marston's, who was sitting on the corner of his bed. I think they said something about guest after supper, Lorne said, feeling exhausted. Funny, did not see to stop you. Marston's eyes seemed to shift from Lorne's hands to his eyes. I'll beat. What warrants the visit? What warrants the meeting? What are you talking about? Never took you for a teacher's pet in pre-specialization school. Now you are the Chihuahua's pet. You have got to be joking, Lorne scoffed, his eyes still penetrated by Marston. He glanced at the black intercom again, the black holes in circular grid patterns, each hole looking deeper and darker. I need to know, Marston said. You need to know what? You saw those officials in the mess hall. Have you ever seen them before? What are you talking about, Marston? I have never met anyone on this ship except you and some of the engineers who were picked up at the same space station. You have no clue, but you are. Over here, running your mouth and saying the wrong things. Marston stood up and took a step closer to him. Lorne felt himself beginning to shake. He knew Marston could not see it. Keeping it hidden was something he was good at. Though their history was complex, Marston's ability to befriend and corner Lorne felt predetermined. Lorne was once again uncertain on Marston's intentions. He seemed to bounce from being nonchalant to extremely concerned with Lorne's agenda. Then Lorne had realized. Marston was a plant. Marston. I do not know what you are talking about. What were you talking about? The intercom's black holes peered at both of them. Marston, we did not say anything. What did you say? His eyes widened. To Lorne, Marston was clearly either scared or determined to get an answer. Marston now looked at what was occupying the pupils of Lorne. They both stared at the intercom. Marston, get out of my room. Lorne stepped forward. Marston stepped back and looked at him once more. Then the intercom. I would tell you to watch out. But it looks like it is too late, Marston said, walking out the small room. Lorne watched the door close. He sat down. He was not shaking, but his arms and legs felt weak. They felt hollow, like the foundation was missing. Steam and beeping from cargo carriers breached the room in one massive gust of polluted air. The door slammed behind the young man with a narrow chin in a black one-piece suit. Attached to the front, an apron. The man looked at the tired receptionist behind the desk across the waiting room. There was 4 more people waiting, all elderly. Perhaps they were here to visit their grandchildren, Cedric thought. "Hi, honey. Just sign in on the tablet at the desk and take a seat," she said, trying to sound welcoming. "No, I'm just here to get someone," Cedric said. "Honey, you know I do not have the authorization to oversee transfers." "Where is their civil agent?" She spoke as if she was used to rejecting the unprepared. "No, I am sorry. I am here to take Juniper to get the commune center to get her registered." "Junip," she said with recognition. "I see." She looked at her tablet with a tense gaze. "Yes, her boarding code is B12. He tried to continue, but she stopped him. "I know who little Juniper is." She smiled, clicking away at her tablet. "Once she gets to giggling, the entire class won't stop cackling. Something about that girl." Cedric could not help to feel joy in hearing that. Before he could take a seat, he heard the clamoring Junip down the hall. She emerged out the door running and stopped at the desk. A smiling woman stepped out the hall behind Junip, waving her to slow down. She gazed at Cedric, who was bracing himself for his little sister approaching like a tornado of serotonin. Junip smiled with excitement at the receptionist, who smiled at her back while also gesturing for her to keep her volume low. Junip leaned in and whispered, "That is my big brother I told you about," then proceeds to giggle. "Oh, the journalist?" the receptionist said, looking at Cedric with performative admiration. "No, that is Lorne. This is Cedric," Junip said. "Lorne has a huge head." The lady accompanying Junip laughed and shushed her. Cedric shook the hand of the lady who entered the room with Junip after she reached for his. "Hello, I am Junip's civil committee agent. I am assigned to her amongst most of the other children here. Well, as you know, I am Cedric," he said with a small shrug at Junip, knowing better than to ask for her name. State workers were not allowed to share their names. "I call her Sevilla," Junip chirped. The lady laughed. "I hear you were going to do the honors and walk her to get registered," she said. "Yes. Is there an issue?" "No." "Well, this is one of the only 2 days I get to check on her throughout the entire week. I would be more than happy to walk her myself. I just figured that I would want to spend some time with my sister." Cedric spoke with a smile to soften interruption, but it leapt from his teeth. "Precisely," she said, gesturing Junip forward to Cedric. "Can Sevilla come?" Junip nearly shouted. "Of course," Cedric assured enthusiastically. "If she wants, of course." She smiled at both. "Well, if I am not intruding, the last thing I want to do is get in the way of quality time." "No, please do. You clearly made good friends with little Junip." He looked at Junip now at his side. "Nice to see. She could be with kids hanging out at transit stations," Cedric said with a chuckle. "Be nice, those are my kids too." Sevilla laughed. Noble of her to stick up for them, Cedric thought. He had wished someone stuck up for them when they were transit kids. The doors slid open, and the 3 filed out the boarding center with Junip in the middle. They sped, walked through the rustic chrome-plated buildings that lost their charm a century before. While not as densely packed as the main streets, the wide alley they moved through was rich with the fumes of illegal street vendors and commune ventilation pipes. The vast spewing gases gave the arcade of homogeneous grey and grease-stained skyscrapers a diverse spectrum of aroma. Began to take lead making sure unregs were scoping them out. Unregs is a term used for unregistered or people who reject their registration living in vagrancy. With prisons abolished and the private sector now responsible for public safety, the sub-I communes were developed and assigned for indentured servants. Policing was replaced with companies carrying out various methods of making sure people followed policy. Unregs often lived under the radar, but in extreme squalor. While those with enough discipline to recognize the false sense of superiority that comes with status may know better than to assume their poor character, they were still a marginalized group of opportunistic individuals. For better and worse, the harsh reality of the calculatedly cold and unforgiving urban world forged survivors. Though pitying their situation was a topic amongst the considerate in private, it was not without reason to be cautious around the swindlers, fences, and thieves that maneuvered in a despair-filled world. Cedric looked back at the two, to see her holding Junip's hand tightly while keeping her awareness peaked. Though Cedric could never read woman well, her eyes were sincere. Here was an aspect of the state's control. a quick-fix method of sustainment in an environment not fit to nurture future generations. Sevilla, or whatever her name actually is, was clearly selected at her role for having caring attributes, qualities that would have been noted in her examination. It was unclear to Cedric at this point if this was just the job she was assigned, or if she genuinely believed she was helping. Though Cedric did have the ability to trust, and even more so to care, it was a quality of him. A quality he and her probably had a lot in common. This reality gives rise to bitterness. After all, if they both are caring, then why was he just a servant? If his older brother Lorne was so smart, why was he sent to the Moles Cove for labor so young? Or what about his athlete older brothers who were sucked into the vacuum of space for the same company? It created a mistrust in professional roles that was deeper than a class divide. It forced everyone that has faith in their own abilities to reevaluate their own potential. A system that propels forward with the kinetic energy of the clawing egos of humanity that are desperately trying not to sink further into its own hole of delusion. They all bent the corner, revealing a massive Main Street with an 8-lane passage. On the street level, cargo carriers rolled past, taking 2 lanes each, with 8 massive rubberized wheels. Above them, transit lines attached to various racking systems through the levels. Most ancient and pre-modern era cities had lost all major architectural infrastructure. Communities, cathedrals, and capitol buildings got replaced by soulless concrete megastructures or the space-age towers that would come to be the norm once extraterrestrial. Resources became humanity's lifeline as the new world evolved, and metals from our local solar system were dragged through the heavens to sustain the world's growing population. Cities led by industries became grid jungles of grey prisms. Only the artisans who may have sculpted gargoyles or carved designs in the trims of ancient architecture no longer existed. They were sent to labor or service. The streets, in a perfect grid, had little to distinguish them aside from the large black codes marked on each structure. Companies no longer made advertisements to try to persuade consumers. After all, there is no competition. They simply informed on new material with banners that extended the height of these 68 floor structures. Cedric's eyes glanced at the bright red logo to the restaurant he worked at. It advertised the new wing steam sauna lounge at Morton's Eatery. It was a service meant for anyone who could afford it, meaning even the bitterest of clientele arrive just to project their misery upon whoever is unlucky enough to serve them. And there lied the pitiful reality of Cedric's life in service and hospitality. A reality he is forced by submission to be fortunate of considering the fate in store for those around him. The clicking of Sevilla's heels ramped up in tempo, and Cedric found himself back in the thralls of a reality greater than his, Junip's. Her soft eyes bounced between them both in anxious suspense. This brilliant young lady, no, child, being forced into the meat grinders of the status quo's excruciatingly fastidious method of discernment. St. Peter, who the world has come to trust due to the circumstances it perpetuates. Overpopulation, so it seems, demands the most adequate competitors in order to sustain. This centuries-old narrative had little resistance, considering it mustered up human labor force that pulled humanity through the Reconstruction era of post-World War III and the takedown of the Caligula asteroid. The power of bringing together massive wealth through the monopolistic control mechanisms of the oligarchies and the communal demands of more livable space summoned a blitz of industrialization that yanked humanity into a space age, an era where the best communes were floating satellites, and magnificent cities of the ancient world were metallic slums designed to shuffle its infinite source of labor like product in a warehouse. Here was Sevilla, carting along a piece of equipment or a soon-to-be servant, with her already claimed servant brother, across the city to be properly placed so that the system could use them to the system's advantage. Like a calf being branded, Junip will be forced to have her essence scrutinized by an entity both greater than, but also indifferent to the egos of humanity. The woman known only as Sevilla glided across the next block as hundreds of loitering workers around the loading center for Sub-I-Commune Factory Port was awaiting to be shipped off to some hazardous worksite. There, files of grizzled men covered in gang-affiliated markings yelled obscenities at the passing state worker. They even yelled terrible things towards the startled Junip, who pouted at Cedric, not because she was worried that degenerate workers would actually assault them, but because she too was forced to acknowledge that her own score implied this was also her identity. That she too was a degenerate, whether she liked it or not. Because these qualities that machines identify in us are beyond our repair. They continued to the commune center, Sevilla's heels clacking at the asphalt, her potential being used at its ability, while simultaneously stifled by the hyper-compartmentalization of the AI governing system. She wanted to help. She wanted to. They entered the building. A glass wall along the waiting lobby revealed a desolate atmosphere. The rooms were dark, with a few long lights emitting the only source of illumination in the state building. A sign reading, "Score submission," hung above a door against the glass wall. Junip approached the room after Cedric pointed her forward. He glanced at Sevilla, who appeared tense. "It's okay, Junip," Cedric said as she glanced back at him one last time before entering the room. When she entered the room, she saw a small circle in the center. At the very back wall were two metallic machines on either side. They were vaguely designed to look like two humanoids facing each other, though their structure hung close to the wall like some form of air conditioning system. One side of the wall displayed a small flashing light and the other side followed. "Please stand on the circle," both sides of the machinery said simultaneously. Junip followed as directed. She looked behind her to see a black rectangle. It was the massive window she had seen upon entering, only it was only transparent through one side. She could not see Cedric or Sevilla, but they could see her. "Without answering aloud, we will be asking you a series of questions. By standing in the circle, we will be able to test your most genuine reaction." Junip nervously shook her head that she understood, but for her it was unclear if the machines needed her to prove her engagement. "Do you believe the world is better than it was?" the machines both asked. To this, Junip was taken back. Even in her own head, she tried to formulate an answer, but the word better seemed to stand out. It stood out because it was a lie. A light flashed beneath Junip. "Next question," the machine stated. Junip understood how this worked now. They were looking for impulses and deep reactions. "If things are not going your way, do you feel entitled to change it?" Junip thought about the question. Entitled was a word she vaguely understood. She understood it in the sense that she recalled Mr. Z's obnoxious children bossing around all the other kids at the rec center, simply because Mr. Z was the supervisor. To her, that was entitlement. And there was very little in Junip's life she felt entitled to. In fact, the question made her wonder if she was entitled to anything. Or would she ever be? Next question. Do you believe in order, if it means you must go last? Once again, Junip was at a loss. She thought about the chaotic loading center she had seen previously. All the workers, with no future, aside for whatever jobs the industries could cram them. They probably hated waiting in lines. But for Junip, if order meant going last, it was better than not being able to go at all. Junip felt confident she made the right answer. She respected rules. Next question. How do you feel about your current despot corporation? Junip felt her stomach drop. She thought of her elder brothers. Before Junip could even begin to form a coherent thought, the light below her flashed vigorously. Juniper resident B12E4011, one side of the machine sounded off. 4 MA/pip, the other side went. Then both sides began flickering a light as if they were processing. The machine on the right side sounded off, with 68% agreement. We have determined you will continue your education in a local Molesco internship at the age of 16. Junip felt her face flush all the blood, and her limbs felt numb. Thud. Junip looked back at the black rectangle. The bang came from it. She wondered what it could be. She had not known that the evaluation from the AI organizer had evoked a response from Cedric that was very much so out of character. Sevilla looked at him with wide eyes as the shaking. And furious Cedric lowered his fist from the one-sided and apparently strongly reinforced window that he just punched. "Cedric, please," Sevilla said, frightened. Not for her own safety. She was worried that Cedric did not know how vindictive artificial intelligence could be, especially when it is designed to purify the power structure by maintaining and altering the fabric of society by using its own judgment to act as the end-all-be-all of society's pecking order. The machine fluttered more. Due to the nature of influences around you, your propensity towards being problematic has been accounted for. With 98% agreement, the left side of the machine announced. Junip had not known what that meant, but across the one-sided window, Cedric was now to his knees, his face red and wet with anger. Sevilla stood over him. She was right. His minor transgression quickly escalated into an indictment of potential future problematic behavior being casted upon Junip. It was not even her fault. They cannot do this to her, Cedric said, trying to wipe his tears away. They are going to send her to the mines or the refineries. Nothing I or Lorne can do to stop it. They know we are victims to this company, and they are positioning us to be the problems to absolve themselves from the responsibility they have. Sevilla looked around the dark lobby, and no one was there but them, and small Junip facing down two unforgiving machines that seemed to hear all. She is brilliant. A lot smarter than me, at least. How could we continue to perpetuate a system that does this to people like us? Cedric looked at Sevilla with watery eyes. I do not know. Sevilla spoke somberly. With 78% agreement, We have decided that you will be subject to L-level communes at the age of 19, unless we find you are fit to test into your current Despot Corporation academies. If your current Despot Corporation is replaced in upcoming election, we will re-evaluate your skills and social scores to determine where we will place you next. Junip stood there in shock. Just like that, her fate has been predetermined. Then she felt sorrow. True to her considerate nature, it was not her she felt this pain for. She wondered about all her classmates, all the boys she constantly helped with schoolwork. If Junip was shunned from a life of opportunity, how were the many others faring? Perhaps they scored fine, and it was just her who scored so terribly. If she could only hold back those reactions she felt when the machine said those words. Those damn words, she thought. Better. Entitled. Order. Last. If only. The light beneath her flashed again, and the right side of the machine fluttered another light. At 100% agreement, you are now registered in the new Pittsburgh data center. It paused, and the other side said, Juniper resident B12E411. Yes, Junip responded meekly. Upon exiting the evaluation chamber, we would like you to ask your chaperone to enter the chamber for an impromptu registration check. The machine said. Cedric felt his hair stand as he quickly shuffled back to his standing position. This is not good, Sevilla said, scanning the room. Two men in padded armor entered the lobby looking around. They both had a look of content when they saw Cedric. They were here for him. The door next to the massive window opened, and Junip stepped out with a defeated look on her face. She began, They want you to. I know, Junip, Cedric said, bending over and hugging her tightly. Everything will be okay. Lorne has a plan. Cedric walked into the room as Junip stood close to Sevilla. Sevilla brushed Junip's bangs from her eyes, revealing the subtle tears. The tears were not for her. The humming noises the Earth engineers were warned of sounded much more like metallic grinding and shifting as the shuttle positioned itself and adjusted its mock gravitational synchronization to connect with the asteroid. Lorne rolled in and out of his sleep. He heard the slight buzz of a drill. The gravitational equalizer would occasionally desync, causing the blankets on Lorne to pull down on him tightly, while he felt the sensation of something on his neck. Lorne found it ridiculous. They were told to sleep during this process, but they seemed very adamant about it. Their sleep cycle technically did call for them to be in bed by now, but the landing initiation was going on halfway through. Thud, thud. Lorne's eyes opened. He looked at his closed door in the dark room. No, it was the other direction. He rose up and looked at his desk. The intercom. Thud, 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 thud. He looked at porthole. It was outside the ship. But how is this possible? Sound does not travel those space. It must be something that is dragging along the surface, but also rattling the interior of the perimeter walls. He stood up and hobbled over to the porthole's thick surface. He peered into the blackness of space, where he could now see a dark silhouette approaching. They were approaching it. Orius K. The thudding continued. Lorne thought it was one of the shields malfunctioning. But if it were a shield, it would be stagnant. It had to be something somehow penetrating the surface of the ship, while also gradually changing its location, as any sound in space would be muffled by its stifled opportunities. It sounded as if it was getting further away. Lorne looked at all angles of the porthole trying to see the ship. The thick tunnel vision presented was not adequate for Lorne to see. He thought the thud sounded more like something or someone dragging along the ship. Then a black object swung past Lorne's window, startling him. He looked again with even more intensity, as his brain was trying to make sense of these anomalies. The black line appeared again, but only for a moment as it extended far past the porthole's view. It was some form of rope or line. Lorne looked at it curiously, trying to muster up an explanation. The sound of an exterior door shifting open commenced, and Lorne began to feel less concerned of a malfunction. Clearly, if an exterior door was opened, someone had to have authorized it. Whether it was a man or equipment being transported meant very little. Nothing of Lorne's concern, he thought. He backed away slowly from the porthole. He laid back in his cot, only this time facing the porthole, which was nearly pitch black, if not for an even darker shade of black emerging from one side. And so, his eyes closed. Low 1 sec. The transit cart fluttered and jerked Lorne's head up from the tablet. Bookworm ass. The boy chirped, bouncing from his seat across the cart. That tablet is not going to get you any pussy. It was followed by the snickering of his entourage. I would rather be looking at this tablet than your upper bite, Lorne rebuked-tailed quickly. The group all laughed at the young man, who sat down again while simultaneously flipping everyone off. One of the young men pulled himself up slowly with the transit handrail. Lorne glanced at him, approaching weary of his intentions. Lorne was not very big for his age. The late teen with a dark green jumpsuit and furiously thick dark hair grabbed handrail bar to bar on his way to Lorne. He carefully looked Lorne up and down while leaned up against the handrail next to him. "What do you want?" Lorne said, while avoiding looking at the bushy eyebrowed kid with a know-it-all grin. "Ah, fuck them. I want to know what it is you are doing," he said, not holding back his grin. Lorne was uncertain if he was there to heckle him or if he was genuinely curious. It's an exercise. Apparently, it can get you into a different headspace to help you score different things in the examination, Lorne said. "Kind of pointless now," he said, looking down at his green, grease-stained jumpsuit with the Mulskos patch. "The same attire they all wore, but in different colors indicating different roles." "Not exactly," Lorne responded, looking at his tablet. "You can be reassigned through promotion, sure." The young man started. "But granting the worthy upward mobility is not really their forte." "Nice choice of words," Lorne said, raising his eyebrow at the guy who suddenly set himself apart from the other young Mulsko warehouse porters. "There is a pretty hefty penalty for it, but I can always apply for a company exchange, then test again. These things can be helpful for you getting into Mulsko academies also, my friend," Lorne said, swishing his long hair that he retired long ago. "That is fucking insane. Why would you volunteer an exchange that will cost you a sub-I-commune? You could literally get stuck out there. You think they would send me out to space?" Lorne asked, looking at his tablet. "You are a little twacked out, aren't you? A smidge." Lorne gestured, his fingers pinching the air. "Earth sub-I-communes are full and fucked. Mulsko at least has industry buddies that can toss you off too," the young man said, looking down at his patch. "You know, if you want to test out of that warehouse, you seriously can get into an academy," Lorne said. "Why don't you do that if it's going to save you a reassignment penalty?" "They didn't tell you about me." Lorne nodded towards his previous antagonist. "Nope. Mom, Dad, and now both my older brothers. Gone. Because of this bullshit company." The young man looked into Lorne's eye with a sorrow that was more genuine than Lorne could have expected. He plopped down next Lorne, passed him a small bronze flask. "Yeah, fuck this place. There is still hope for you." "To do what?" "They are sending half of us to mining specialization." "You can join one of the academies," Lorne said, looking at the others across the train cart. "Can't say the same for them." "Like what? I am way too impatient and stubborn to get into any of their tech fields." "There is always Oval Academy. Reporting promotions and kissing ass to chihuahuas." He chuckled. "Better than what they got us doing now, though, right? If we are lucky, we will be a worksite accident also," he said, looking out the transit cart's window as the railway elevated into a black tunnel. "One smush, and we won't have to deal with this bullshit." "What do you mean?" Lorne asked. "Getting crushed by a mole's cargo crate, I mean. Boom, lights out. No more of this bullshit in the warehouses and surviving off commune rations for me." "Well, that's fucking morbid." Lorne paused. "Wish it was that easy. I got a little brother and sister still." "Oh, so you ain't alone. Living across the city from them is not what I consider ideal for being together." Lorne took a swig. The focus slipped abruptly as the transit tore through the shadowy barricade and out the tunnel. The towers that were fume-stained duplications of each other in never-ending columns and rows looked like the surface of what contemporary people viewed as ancient CPU hardware, carefully calculated lines and networks meant to shuffle around its commodities and data with no consideration for the individual unit. "What makes you think I could get into Oval?" he said, clearly stuck on the thought as he looked out the transit window. "Blackness swirling with occasional neon light signs. You seem like a smart guy. If you are with those guys, probably a bit of an asshole. But the corporate world loves those." With a few of these exercises, Lorne pointed to his tablet and flicked his finger to scroll along the study guide module he was using. "You may have a chance of getting in. That is if you can behave." The young man, about the same age as this much livelier version of Lorne, took the flask back. He looked at the bronze container with its dove insignia, thumb on the top to unscrew. But he didn't. He slid it back into his pocket. "Hello, you can help me with the exercises?" "Yeah," Lorne said, glancing back at the others who were now snickering at both for no obvious reason. "Yo, Martz, you found a study buddy?" One heckler cracked. "Or a buddy to stud you?" Lorne and Mars laughed. They were assholes, but they were their assholes. "So that is the name, Mars." "Hey, Marston, if we are going to be adults about it." "Fuck that. I'm not letting you call me Lornal." "Lornal," Marston laughed. "That sounds like an instrument. Like a clarinet with Down syndrome. You're a delight." Lorne paused. "So, we agree on Lorne then?" "Lornal sounds like one of those space station exclusive STDs." "Christ, you got one more then, I am not helping you." "All right. Marston said, grinning. Lorne all sounds like it belongs in a saltwater aquarium. Are you done? You said one more. Marston chuckled. The lights of the transit fluttered again as the train jerked everyone off guard. The lights fluttered again. Only the boys across the car were gone. Lorne looked over to the window. The blackness of space, the stars glimmering. He was no longer in New Pittsburgh. The transit light fluttered again. Lorne looked over to Marston. He was gone. The lights went black, and the transit jerked violently.